Good evening. It's good to see everyone out. It's good to have. All right, so we're going to, if we haven't moved quickly already, we're really going to try to move quickly tonight. We've only got 2 more weeks to get through quite a bit that I still like to get through. But before we actually pick up with Lesson 14, I wanted to just go over 2 quick things from Lesson 13. So if you've got your book, open it up to page 127. So the lesson is about the child's level, which we have hit on this several times throughout the class, how important it is to make sure that you are teaching on the child's level. You don't want to teach under the children where they're not learning anything and they're getting bored out of their mind, and you don't want to teach on a level that is much, much higher than they could ever learn, because that's just going to get frustrating for them. He gives a great example in the beginning of the lesson and asks you to read a phrase, which that's either written in Greek or Hebrew, and I'm sure nobody can read that. So if we were tested and said we had to read that, we'd get pretty frustrated. But one of the things that he points out in the lesson is trying to learn the child's level. And we've talked about that, how important it is to learn the children that are in your class, because the better your relationship with the kids, the more you know about their abilities, the easier it's going to be with you to teach and to connect with them. But one of the things, I don't disagree with a whole lot of things that he says in here. I think it's a great book, a great resource. But on one of the things that he says that you can do to learn a child's level, on page 128, number 4, this is on the second column, he says, ask the children in your class what they make on their report cards from school. A's in our modern schools do not mean that the child has learned all they need to know about a subject. They only mean that he is responding easily on the level of work he has been given. Therefore, if a child is making C or below consistently, then he is having difficulty with the graded material for the age level. The Bible teacher must take that into account and lower her material accordingly, since our goal is to help each child learn the truth he needs in order to reach heaven. Then we want each child to pass this course with flying colors. Don't ever ask a kid their grades that they make in school in Bible class, okay? I vehemently disagree with this. Like, do not do that. That is not something that needs to be discussed with all of the other kids. So I want you to learn the kids and understand the kids, but don't go asking them what they make in school, okay? That's not a good thing, and you're not going to build good relationships that way, and you're actually going to cause tension within the class between other students. Erica?
I think we mentioned before, and I think a good idea, if you're going to a class and you see that maybe one of the kids is struggling, then the best thing to do is go to the parents and talk to them, and so that way you know how to redo your class accordingly, because that's not right to single out a child or make others feel that can be belittling to children, or even intimidating.
Yeah, absolutely. Daniel?
Oh, no.
Sorry, I thought I saw your hand go up.
One of the things that he talks about also is testing in class, and I'll be honest with you, I am a fan of that. For multiple reasons, but don't do it because you're trying to make somebody look bad or because you're trying to make the parents look bad, and so you make this really hard test and then you send it home with the kids, and so the parents can see, well, my kid just failed, made an F on their Bible class test. So don't do it because you're trying to make a point to the parents or because you're trying to make a point to the kids. Do it because you're trying to review and make sure that they're learning. It is a method for you to know, are they actually getting the information that you're teaching? And so I'm totally fine with testing, and I think that is something with certain age groups that is actually needed. Keep them on their toes as well. All right, so lesson 14, so parents and babies. So basically what we're doing is talking about each individual age level and different suggestions maybe whenever you are in a Bible class with these ages. And so he starts with this idea of parents and babies, which we have, again, talked about several times throughout the book, is the importance of parents and the role that we play, and we have the primary responsibility. And so just because we are now sending our kid to a Bible class doesn't mean that we can wash our hands clean and be like, okay, now the Bible class teacher can take over, I'm good. So that's kind of where we're starting. So I wanted to read a few passages. So if you would go ahead and get your Bibles out, we'll be turning to a few passages. And so he mentions that that's kind of what we're doing with the next several lessons. And again, the fact of the matter is it is our responsibility and the soul of our children, every soul of the students that are down there, everybody's going to spend an eternity in heaven or hell. And as the parents, we play a huge role in whether or not the souls of our children are going to be in heaven or they're going to be in hell. Now, we have to teach them and train them to the point that they can have their own faith, they can have their own convictions, but we play such a huge role with that we have a great responsibility in helping lead them to their eternal destination. And so don't forget that. 2 Timothy 3:15, we're going to start here with Gil, and then we'll start working our way back. So if you would read 2 Timothy 3:15 for us.
And that from childhood you have known the Holy Scriptures, which are able to make you wise for salvation through faith, which is in Christ Jesus.
Timothy obviously had a great mother, had a great grandmother that were very key in helping to train him from a very early age. And that's a great example for us, both as parents and grandparents, to learn from. And we have to make sure that we understand that our job starts immediately. And from a very early age, we've talked about it, Brother Waldron has touched on it, that they start picking up and they're very perceptive on things from a very, very early age. And so we have to start very, very early. Ephesians 6, verse 4. Mark, if you would grab that one.
Ephesians 6:4, and you fathers do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord.
So we've talked about discipline, biblical discipline. We hit on that whenever we did the lesson, I think it was 12, that was on discipline, and how it really includes a lot of different things, not just whipping. And so there is this training, this instruction, this nurturing that has to take place, and he actually touches on this. At the end of this lesson, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on it, but fathers really hold the key. We are ultimately responsible for our children and their training, their discipline, their instruction, and so we need to make sure that we do not forget that. Deuteronomy 6, 5, and 7. Andy?
You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all of your might. And these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up.
So we're not going to hit on this every time, but I actually have this passage 3 times throughout this PowerPoint for a specific reason. This is pretty key whenever you're talking about parents and babies and how important it is for us as parents. One of the things that he hits on is constantly talking with your children, that you're always having conversations when you're at the grocery store, when you're driving in your vehicle, even when you're at your house. And that's what we're told to do, to constantly be talking about the Lord and using our everyday life to help teach them and to guide them. Proverbs 22, verse 6. Norm?
Train up a child in the way he should go, and even when he is old, he will not depart from it.
Those of you that are older, that have grown kids, that have done that, you can see the proof of that. And that's something that those of us parents that are younger, we're striving to do. Obviously, we want to train them now so that when they are older, that they're going to continue to follow the Lord. He talks about how critical the first 2 years of life are. And again, kids start learning things at such an early age, and so we've got to hit them early. He says you have some very important lesson to teach him during his first couple of years, but these lessons are your responsibility to teach, not some babysitter at the church house who is being called a teacher. So again, we can't just shift the responsibility just because now we're sending them down to a class downstairs and now they've got a Bible class teacher. Joshua 1 verse 8, Drew.
Sorry. The book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success.
Sounds pretty similar to Deuteronomy 6, 5, and 7, but again, it's critical that this is something that we're talking about, that we're meditating on ourselves, and that we're helping to, again, train our children. There it is again, Deuteronomy 6, 5, and 7. 2 Timothy 3, 14, and 15. Marissa, can you get that one?
Well, we read verse 15. We're going to add verse 14.
You, however, continue in the things you have learned and become convinced of, knowing from whom you have learned them, and that from childhood you have known the sacred writings, which are able to give you the wisdom that leads to salvation through faith which is in Christ Jesus.
If you look up that word childhood, the Greek word actually means the very youngest infant. It actually has this idea of fetus. And one of the things that he talks about, I think, next in this lesson is read to your child, and actually reading to them while they're still in the womb. They can recognize your voice, and so don't ever think that you can't start as early as that. And so we have to get started, and we have to continue with that. We've talked about this multiple times, how important it is for us to set good examples as parents. It's also key that we set good examples as teachers, because again, kids are very intelligent when it comes to figuring out somebody that's bluffing and they're faking it. This isn't a situation where you fake it till you make it, because if you fake it, you ain't going to make it. And the kids are going to catch on to that. So as parents and as teachers, we have to make sure that we are showing them what we are teaching them. And it's very, very important that we set good examples in all of those things. So there's everybody that's had kids, or you do have kids, it's very difficult trying to figure out what to do when you've got disruptive kids that are in worship services, or maybe even in Bible class. If you've got them with you upstairs in the adult Bible class, it's uncomfortable when the kid is making noise, and in your mind, everybody's eyes are on you, and it's like the heat is on. And so it can be very difficult to know what to do. So he's mentioned a few things, and I just wanted to kind of touch on this, because this is a big deal. Because we've all have had that situation. I've never seen a parent in worship services that has a perfect kid. At some point or another, every kid is going to be disruptive or have issues. So he talks about, he mentions that let your baby learn from the very beginning that we always go to worship God, even when it's not quite convenient. And again, that goes back to setting a good example. And the kids are going to pick up on that pretty quickly whenever the smallest thing keeps you from worship services. And so make sure that they're learning from a very early age that it's going to take a major deal to keep us from going to worship or to keep us from going to Bible class. Because if you show them now that it's okay in certain situations to not go to worship services or not go to Bible class, then as they get older, you know what's going to happen? They're going to creep further and further away. And so it's very, very critical that we show them the importance of coming to church services. Your baby can learn very early that the church house is a place that calls for unique behavior. And I think that's important. I think that we need to teach them from a very early age, when we come here, this isn't playtime, this isn't snack time, and you've got your pantry right there on the pew with you, and you've got their toy box right there on the pew with you. We need to teach them that this is a different place, and we're going to act differently, and there are different expectations whenever we come into the church services. It's a difficult lesson for a baby to learn, but it is one of the most important lessons of his life, because you are laying the groundwork for all later lessons on reverence for God. Obviously, we're told to worship God in spirit and in truth. We are to have reverence and respect for the worship services, and we have to teach them that from a very, very early age. So he mentioned some do's and don'ts. Be consistent. Again, this goes back to kids pick up on things pretty quickly, and so if you're not consistent, then they're going to try to get away with more than they need to. Be patient, because again, we've all been there, and we know how it can be embarrassing, and At least it's embarrassing to you. But we've also all been on the other side of it, where it's like, I mean, I'll be honest with you, I'm to the point I don't pay a whole lot of attention to babies, but I would rather hear a baby crying in worship services than not, because to me that's a good sound. But you do have to be patient with the child, and I think part of that is just the smallest thing doesn't mean now let's get out, because you can teach the child pretty quickly, okay, if I do something, then I don't have to sit in here. And I can go to the nursery or I can go downstairs and have playtime. And so be patient. Don't be afraid to discipline. I think that sometimes we are scared, even during worship services, to discipline. And obviously I think that all of us that have been parents or are parents, you've learned that it's much better to discipline in the moment when the action has taken place. And so don't be afraid to discipline. And one of the things that he talks about is being mindful of others. And I just wanted to read that section. It's on page 140. Second column. It says, parents, let me say one more thing about your baby in worship service. Is not only do you have a grave responsibility toward that baby, you also have a responsibility to those around you. The teachers, preacher have put forth effort to prepare lessons that are needed by the people in the audience. Every adult in the building has the right to hear the message that is given. All of us know that small children are going to make noise, but you as the parent have the responsibility to keep that baby's noises to a minimum. The tiny infant may cry out because he has a bubble hurting his stomach. He feels fine after a good burp, but if his cries prolong more than a moment, please take him out of the auditorium until you can solve the problem. Then quietly return to your seat and continue listening to the lesson. Now, I bring that up because I don't think that we have this problem whatsoever, but I think that there are certain situations where you can't let it go on too far, but we don't have this situation. But the point that I think that he makes that I want to make sure we understand is when you go out for whatever situation, then after that situation is dealt with, you need to come back. You need to teach them that this is where we're going to be. And even try to teach them why we're going to be here. Again, if you keep them out, then they look at it almost as a reward. Since Jesse's not here, we can talk about Jesse. It's like, I don't have to listen to the preacher. So bring them back. Don't grow weary. You are teaching more than you even know. I will never forget, whenever we started having kids, Clarissa's mom, she talked about the years of her raising the children as I think she called them the forgotten years, maybe what she called them. But she just mentioned it took so much work and effort that it is sometimes harder for you to be engaged, but your work, your job there is very, very important. Now we need to make sure that we are trying to give God and glorify God in everything that we do and in our worship, but it is very key and very important that we are training our children how to act during worship services. So we already talked about the nursery. Don't allow that to become playtime. So I know it's like, oh, he's going to skip over fathers. Now we're going to talk about working mothers. No, we talked about fathers at the beginning. This is something that we don't talk a lot about, and I think that it is something that is very important. Whenever we're talking about families and young families, and obviously there are certain situations where you can't work around it. One of the points that he makes, though, is if you're a family and you're basically forcing your wife to work just because you're trying to get rich, then that's not a good situation. You got to recognize the preciousness of the time that you have with your young children. So make sure that you're taking advantage of that and not working because you're trying to better yourself. He talks about maybe not taking those college classes and then going ahead with your education until maybe the kids are grown or a little bit bigger. And those are things that we have to weigh. We have to understand our importance with teaching them and training them in the Lord's way. And that's the most important thing. So he ends with saying, parents, your task as teachers did not end when your child starts attending the Bible classes at the church building. It is your task to train your child in the way he should go. So let's not forget that as parents. I know that this is really trying to teach us and train us how to be better teachers, but can help us and teach us how to be better parents as well. All right, Michael, let's go ahead and switch over to 15. Any comments on the parents and the babies? Some of you parents that have been through it. Miss Shirley?
Mine was little, and they disrupted the worship service. If I got up and took them out, they knew they were going to get a spanking. And once in a while, Teresa would holler, "I'll be good, Mama. I won't do that no more, Mama." As I was taking her out, but I went on out anyway.
Yeah.
So you just have to ignore that and go on.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I remember one situation. We were in worship services, and my cousin was with us, and I don't know what he said, but he made me laugh, and I laughed out loud in church services, and I never did that again. It still gives me chills just thinking about that situation. I won't ever forget that. Erica?
When Jody was a baby, I don't know if it bless her heart or bless her daddy's heart, but she started talking when she was 7 months. She started saying words, and then she was like her mother, and she just wants to talk all the time. And we were having a really hard time with her in services because she's so little, but she wasn't even a year old yet, but how do you make them understand to be quiet? And so I had an older sister in the church come to me, and she said, she said, "I see you're struggling." She said, "I want you to play church at home." And that was the best advice I ever got. We would put on, and back then that was I remember we had upgraded to DVD disc that you could pop in. So I would put a sermon on the TV, and I would set up our dining chairs, and I'd put a little Bible book for her to look at, and we'd sit there and we would play church, and she'd start talking, I'd say, "No, no," and I'd pat her hand, "No, no, we're not going to talk." And it took a little time at home, but it started transferring over, and that was some of the best advice that I got was just play church, and it helps a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, kids that know how important it is, and they have the attitude of they enjoy coming. Kids will do that themselves at home. They'll do that even here. Like you'll see the kids, they'll go up front and they want to act like they're the ones that are preaching or teaching. One of the other things that I have that we always try to do, and I've heard other people say it as well. Even as your kids get a little bit older, it's good to have them sitting in front of you, because if they're sitting behind you, whoever they may be sitting with, if they don't have the same standards as you, then the kid may be getting away with things that you aren't aware of, and they're not being disciplined. So that's something that I know we have tried to do, and something that has helped and it can help. Did I see another hand? Ms. Shirley?
I don't think it hurts to smack their little legs in the worship service to make them understand.
I think if they're doing something right there and you can handle it right there, absolutely, yeah. Smack them in the mouth when they're talking, thump them in the mouth. Miss Nancy?
I want to say something about Jason.
Uh-oh. Right.
We always sat behind Jason when his kids was little. And whenever they said anything or was loud or anything, he'd flip them in the mouth like that. That always got me.
And now they're scared of me, which is exactly what I want.
Although you don't have a problem standing in the back smiling at other people's kids.
That's right.
All right, Bible class for preschool, the preschool child. And again, we're going to hit on this pretty quickly so we can get through 15 and hopefully 16. So when we're talking about the preschool child, he talks about this idea of trying to determine when you should send them to Bible class. And I don't think when we first came here 16 years ago, I don't remember having a bucket class. This is something that we've kind of adapted to. And of course, we recognize how early children actually can learn, but there's no precise age, that a kid needs to start Bible class. but you have to make sure that the kid can actually handle being in Bible class before you send a kid down to Bible class, because that's just going to be more disruptive for the teachers and for the other students as well. And one of the things that he points out, and we'll make sure that Norm understands this, too often young, inexperienced teachers are given these classes because the men consider them the least valuable. So we get the preschool kids, and it's like, okay, let's get the inexperienced teacher. You know, this class don't really matter, and so let's just stick them down in there. And he makes this point in a couple of the lessons that the teachers of these younger kids are actually the most important, because they are so impressionable at a younger age, and so we have to make sure that we are putting experienced teachers in these situations, because with the younger ones it can be a little harder too, and you got to make sure that you're on your toes always, that you're always energetic, and so having a little more experience with those is important. So he talks about the infant, simple things, repetitive things, and I don't know why we started doing this. I don't know who originally set this up, but the way that we do it I think is great, where we've got like 6 or 7 tubs of stories, and I know we've got Moses and we've got Jesus, and so we'll get a tub out with the kids and we'll do that story for maybe a month. And so it's repetitive. Even during class, it's repetitive. And there are things that they can hold in their hands, and there are songs that go along with it. And you're constantly moving and keeping it going. And so those are things that are simple and that are repetitive, that they can actually start learning these stories from a very, very young age. And I mentioned the tubs. I mean, the tub is just filled with aids, things that are going to help you and that are going to help the kids, keep them active, and keep them engaged and keep it moving along. He mentions about how the classes shouldn't be too big. We've never had maybe more than 4 or 5. If it does get too big, may need another teacher in there with all those hands. Remember, you are working with infants, not miniature adults. And this kind of goes along with something that he talked about previously. If you've never been a parent, you might not understand really what the expectations are for each age group. And when you're a new parent, you don't quite understand it to the fullest either. But don't walk in to a class of preschoolers and expect them to act like adults, miniature adults, because it's not going to happen. So don't have that expectations. So 2 and 3-year-olds. So obviously the 2-year-old, anybody that's had a 2-year-old, they got a short attention span. And you've got to be able to work with that. And so that's what I'm saying. It is very important that you are on your toes and that you're constantly moving and that you're energetic, because their attention span is no. And they like to say no a lot too. May understand what you say, but may not understand why. And again, this is part of just kind of learning the age group. But one of the things that you know, if you've been a parent, is how quickly they can learn even at 2 years old. They are learning so much. And so it's a fun age, and it's an important age, that we are making sure that we are teaching them the stories. And he talks about it a little bit later on. We're teaching stories really at this point. We're not teaching necessarily principles, because they are still so young. At 3, they still have a short attention span, but they may be able to listen a little bit better than a 2-year-old. And some of this, obviously, every kid is different. So these are kind of generalities, so just remember that. A 3-year-old obviously is going to be able to talk more fluently, and they may actually be able to answer questions whenever you've told a story and be able to repeat things back to you, and so you're progressing just a little bit. So again, you're teaching the stories, not just the principles at this very early age. So the 4 and 5-year-old, so a 4-year-old, very restless, and at 4 years old, if you've done your job, then they are going to understand when you tell them what to do. It doesn't necessarily mean that they want to obey, and that's where you still got to beat it out of them, but they do understand. And again, with each age, you're hoping to see this little bit of progression in their ability to sit quietly in Bible class. And that's one of the things that he points out, and I can't remember if I have this highlighted or not, but part of what we're teaching them from a very early age is how to listen, how to actually act in Bible class. And I know that we've talked this whole quarter about, you've got to fill the time and you've got to teach the Bible, and that's very true, but there's a little more discipline that has to be taken into account from these earlier ages. If they go from a bucket class where they've literally been contained and now they get in a seat where they can move around, there may be some training that needs to go on, some discipline that needs to go on as far as teaching them to sit still and to actually listen. But again, you're hoping to see this progression hopefully at each age group. So with the 4 and 5-year-olds, it says there's an enormous difference in the maturity level of a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old. In fact, there is more difference in this gap than in any other 3-year gap in his growing up cycle. So the two groups should never be placed in the same room. And I think that we're very blessed to have so many different Bible classes in different age groups, but it is something to remember if some of you move on to maybe a different congregation. But also just recognize that you don't need a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old in the same Bible class, because that would be very, very difficult. One of the primary lessons you will be teaching is teaching them how to listen. It's a slow process, but it is a lesson that children must learn. If you do your job well, you have prevented the majority of the discipline problems that might arise in older classes. And you can tell a kid that's been well trained in a younger Bible class from those that maybe that don't have the experience from being in a Bible class. And so take advantage of the time when they are younger to help them with that. Obviously, we are trying to teach them the Bible. It is a lack of faith on our part if we think they would not like the Bible stories. And again, don't ever say that in Bible class, that something is not important or something is boring. And we shouldn't think that some particular story that we've read through, it's like, well, they're not really going to be interested in this. That's the wrong attitude. Think through all the points we've made about platitudes in the book. This is the age most likely to be fed such spiritual mush. And we do have to be careful of that we're not just teaching them, okay, we're going to be kind to each other. We're going to be kind to our grandmother. Make sure that we are teaching them the Bible stories, the story that we are told, and make sure that they understand that these aren't just stories. These are real people. These were real events, and these are all playing a role in the life of Christ, our Savior. Do not fight maturity levels. Now, again, he's hit on this multiple times throughout the class. You've got to be willing to change your methods if necessary, so you've got to be flexible. Change positions if necessary. We talked about that in our discipline class. Maybe you start off and you're sitting at a table with the students and that doesn't seem to be working. Maybe there's some issues. Stand up, walk around the room maybe. We talked about the idea of being the big bad wolf. If you have to be firm, be gruff. Don't teach in the same tone that you discipline. Boy, that would be rough. I was just thinking about that when I was reading through this again. And if my dad always talked to me the way that he talked to me when he was mad at me, I don't know that I would ever learn. I'd just be scared the whole time. So you got to have a different tone. The kids need to know when you're teaching and when you're teaching. And then when you're teaching, then they're going to pay attention more when you're teaching. Don't teach in the same tone or be energetic. We've hit that over and over again. You've got to be energetic. You've got to be enthusiastic, especially with the younger kids, to keep them engaged. Use them as much as possible. The aids, the younger kids, it's very, very important to keep them engaged using as many aids as you can. In the very beginning of the book, he talked about the more senses that you can get involved in the learning process, the more they're going to learn, the more they're going to actually hold on to. And so with the visual, the singing, the holding of the things, the pictures, the videos, whatever you can do to help them in using those aids is just going to be more beneficial. Be simple, be direct, make weekly lesson aids to post and help with review. He talks about reviewing a lot, and that's very important to make sure that the kids are actually learning and not forgetting. And then from this age group, this preschool age group, singing is so important. And we've talked about that, how important it is and how much easier it is for these kids to learn things through song. The only downside to the singing, and I mentioned this a couple of class periods ago, that Jesse's actually making the middle school and the high school kids say the books of the Bible. And so Zoe, she was, said say the Old Testament, and she was like, I just couldn't get the song out of my head. Of course, when you grow up and all you do is you sing them, it's a little harder to stop and then just to say them. Repetition is the most effective way to learn at any age, and it is absolutely necessary for the preschool age. Repetition, repetition, repetition. And this is what I have told my older classes. My expectation is that you're going to do your Bible lesson at home, then we're going to go over it again, and this is repetition. And hopefully that's going to make it stick better with you. So it is such an important thing. We've talked about, especially with the younger kids, don't allow purses, don't allow the kids to bring in toys. And Clarissa's not in here, so I'll say this. She said I was a little too hard on everybody when I was talking about my rant about the phones, or electronic devices. She said she was sitting there and she was just thinking, okay, move on, move on, move on. But I'm telling you, it's a pet peeve of mine. So sorry if I came across too gruff with the phones, but I'm still not changing. You're not getting a phone in my Bible class. So some suggestions that he makes as far as a lesson plan, and again, this is for the preschool age. So begin with a quick review of last week's lesson, and that's always a good place to start, especially with this younger age. You're going to review the things that you worked on, and in some of our classes, they're teaching the same thing on Sunday and Wednesday, which is great because there is more review, but you still need to review last week's lesson at the beginning of class. Tell the new story for today with your visual aids. So you've got your new lesson, and you've decided what's going to work best for that particular age group, so you're going to tell the new story. Post weekly picture and show how today's lesson fits into the sequence. Review the old pictures. And again, it's pretty important with the younger kids, with the visual aids, that they have pictures and things to go along with the story that help keep them engaged. Sing a song about the story. Review today's story more than once. And I know I've talked to several teachers that have taught the younger kids, and they'll tell the story in using different methods. And so they're telling the same story multiple times within the same class period to make sure that the kids are really getting it. Number 6, let the children retell the story using the visual aid. We talked about that with the flannel board, how that the kids can now retell the story. I know Miss Penny before has had them act it out, so the kids are engaged and they're acting the story out. So that's one thing that you can do. Number 7, if the children are as much as 4 and 5 years old, you might try learning a short memory verse that fits the story. I think that is great. All right, don't ever sell kids short and think that they're not going to be able to learn a memory verse. And learning a memory verse is key. Obviously, we want them to learn God's Word, and there's no better way than giving them memory verses. Number 8, sing the song about your story again. Again, you're just repeating it. Practice the books of the Bible. That's something that from an early age that is good to have them doing constantly. Review an old story, perhaps the favorite one. And this is, of course, if you've got extra time at the end of toward the end of the class. Number 11, before leaving class, review today's story one last time to be sure it is firmly placed in each mind. So I don't know how many times within this is actually saying go over the story, 3 or 4. At this preschool age, it is very important. So you can't have this long, elaborate story that takes 35 minutes to tell. You're going to lose the kids anyways by that point. So you've got a story. It's going to be short. You're going to tell it, and you're going to tell it multiple ways throughout the class period to make sure that they are getting it, that you are constantly reviewing. All right, Michael, number 16. Boy, we're just moving right along. Any comments on the preschool child? All right, we got 5 minutes to get through lesson 16. Erica?
I think it was important, he's mentioned throughout the book several times, but with these younger kids, to over and over and over remind them that these are real people and they're real stories of history. This is not fairy tales, because they watch their fairy tales and they read their fairy tales all day. And when we sit down and study the Bible, this is real. And I think that even from a little bitty age to start getting that in their mind.
Yeah, when with some of the fairy tale stuff that they actually read, and then you read some of the stories in the Bible, they almost sound like fairy tales. I mean, they're pretty crazy. David and Goliath, I mean, doesn't that sound like a fairy tale? But that's real. David was real. Goliath was real. That slingshot he used was real. And so all of these things are real events, and they play a part, again, in the story of Christ. So the elementary school child, we won't get through with this, but we'll get through part of it. So he talks about emphasizing content. He says these school-age children are capable of learning more material than at any other period of life. The best teachers should be in the classes for young people. I mentioned that earlier. Even though they are not yet ready for the epistles or topical studies, there is more Bible history waiting to be taught than you have time to teach. And so Bible's got a lot of important stories. And starting now, this is the school-age children, so this is more like kindergarten through 3rd or 4th grade, I think is what he's kind of hitting on. And obviously they are able to hold more information. They're able to learn more. And so again, we need to make sure that we are not selling them short. He gives a note to parents, and few things that he says there is continue building on foundation of Bible knowledge that you began laying at birth. So we talked about that with the parents and the babies from the beginning. Even when they're in the womb, we're going to start this process, and we're going to continue building on that, fill in the gaps that were too hard for him to understand earlier. And so even as a parent, you've taught or gone over certain stories, and you're going to just build on those as the kids get older. Set strict standards for behavior and help him see from God's Word why these standards are best. Help him gain strength from his own battles. And to me, this is a big one that kind of goes along with what Jesse was talking about whenever he was talking about the preaching to the young ones and making sure that they're not being canceled. And I think as kids get older, kids are going to have their own battles. And I think that we need to allow them to have these battles and allow them to fight these battles. And let them gain strength from those. And we're not always just swooping in to try to protect them. Obviously, that is our job. But one of the things that they need to learn is that you can overcome these difficult things and we all understand the difficulties that a 9 or 10-year-old is facing. It's not the same level of difficulties that we may face as a 40, 50, 60, 70-year-old, but to them it's pretty difficult. And allow them to work through those things as parents and help them gain strength from that. So the 6-year-old, the first grader finds that his day is filled with hard work. And it's all kind of a new learning process whenever they get into school. It was fun to learn to read, but now his teacher wants him to finish the book and start another. And so now maybe it's not so fun because it's now turned into work. It's not long before they discover that this new skill of learning can be frustrating. And so we have to recognize that. Again, we can't just pile on too hard. We want to push them, but we don't want to push them to the point that they are just majorly frustrated. The 7-year-old can be more content with themselves. They can read and do their assignments easily, provided they are on his grade level. And so as long as the assignment is tailored to their grade level, then they are going to be more apt to be able to do it. And at this point in their lives, they do like to finish what they start. And they're starting to become more independent and more responsible with certain things, and you need to take advantage of that. The 8 and 9-year-old, they want things straightforward or man-to-man, and so they're learning pretty quickly when you're trying to beat around the bush. And so oftentimes we need to be more direct with our children as parents and as teachers too. They're loud, they're rowdy, and they're rough. They climb trees, and this is both boys and girls. And the little dogwood tree out there is a testament to that because it's no respecter of boys or girls. They like to climb trees. They like to be active. So learning for the sake of learning may not be as much fun, but they still enjoy new and interesting facts. And so much of this is depending upon how you present those. Okay, you can take a kid who is really interested in learning things, and you present it in such a way where they're just yawning. And so again, so much of this is going to be on us as teachers, that we are presenting things that they are very interesting and they're very important, and we need to present them as such. So we'll pick up here next week, and then we're going to finish up this, and then we're going to talk about the preteens, the teens, the adults, and probably spend a little bit more time talking about the adults. Thanks, everybody.